Our gospel reading comes to us today from Luke's gospel in the 24th chapter. And some context. In Luke's gospel, the resurrection has just happened. They'd gone to the tomb to discover it was empty. And Luke picks up with the story of Cleopas and the other unnamed disciple who was unaware of the recent events that Jesus was on the tomb. So listen to God's word. Now that same day, two of them were going to a village called Emmaus, about 7 miles from Jerusalem. And they were talking with each other about everything that had happened. As they had talked and discussed these things with each other, Jesus himself came up and walked along with them, but they were kept from recognizing him. Jesus asked them, "What are you discussing as you walk along?" And they stood still, their faces were downcast. And one of them, named Cleopas, asked him, "Are you the only visitor in Jerusalem? Are you only a visitor to Jerusalem and do not know the things that have happened in these days?" "What things?" he asked. And they responded, "About Jesus of Nazareth. He was a prophet, powerful in word and deed before God and all the people. The chief priests and our rulers handed him over to be sentenced to death, and they crucified him. But we had hoped that he was the one who was going to redeem Israel. And what is more, it is the 3rd day since all this took place. In addition, some of our women amazed us. They went to the tomb early this morning, but didn't find his body. They came and told us what they had seen, a vision of angels who said he was alive. Then some of our companions went to the tomb and found it just as the women had said, but him they did not see." And he said to them, "How foolish you are, and how slow of heart to believe all that the prophets had spoken. Did not the Christ have to suffer these things and then enter his glory?" And beginning with Moses and all the prophets, he explained to them what was said in all the scriptures concerning himself. And as they approached the village to which they were going, Jesus acted as if he were going further. But they urged him strongly, saying, "Stay with us. It is nearly evening. The day is almost over." So he went in to stay with them. And when he was at the table with them, he took the bread, gave thanks, broke it, and began to give it to them. Then their eyes were opened, and they recognized him. And he disappeared from their sight. And they asked each other, "Were not our hearts burning within us while he talked with us on the road and opened the scriptures to us?" They got up and returned at once to Jerusalem. They found the 11 and those with them assembled together, and saying, "It is true, the Lord has risen and has appeared to Simon." Then the two told what had happened on the way, and how Jesus was recognized by them when he broke the bread. This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. There's a story of a monastery in Europe, a monastery that had survived through the ages, but it found themselves down to an abbot and 5 brothers, monks, and they were all in their 70s. And amidst the secularization of modern-day Europe, they were depressed, wondering that their monastery may not be able to survive beyond the 5 remaining brothers that lived there. The climate and the social life of the brothers was rather depressed. They had spent many years together, and with little hope for the future, the small things in their closed community, small community, really began to irritate one another. They would bicker with one another about chores at mealtime. They would roll their eyes during the studies when one thought that they had a nice point to make about the Lord Jesus Christ after it had been told time after time. Now there was a rabbi who would come for prayer space in this monastery once or twice a year, and over the years they grew to love this rabbi. He was growing old as well, and they thought that this might be one of the last visits of the rabbi. So at the hermitage, the abbot got up and he walked over to spend some precious time with the rabbi. The abbot said, "Rabbi, things are not good here. We were once a strong monastery, a place of hope, a place of spiritual renewal, but we have not had a new brother in years. Do you have any advice or perspective from our sister, from our mother religion of the Jewish heritage?" The rabbi was saddened, commiserated with the abbot. He says, "It is the same in my village. No one visits the synagogue anymore, and there is not a spirit amongst the people." So they cried together. They prayed together. They read the Torah together and embraced one another. But the abbot said, "I feel like I have not been able to achieve my task. Surely you must have some good word for us here at the monastery." And the rabbi said, "No, I have no good word other than this. That one of you is the Messiah." They embraced, and the abbot walked back to his brothers. They said, "How is the rabbi?" He said he had no good words to offer us, but said something rather cryptic, and I don't understand it. "The Messiah is one of us," he said, and they giggled a little bit. Pondered these words, one of you is the Messiah. So as they pondered these cryptic words, they began to wonder if maybe the rabbi was right. Philip. Could Brother Philip be the Messiah? He is the biggest goofball that we know and hardly does anything right. But my, how he loves one another. Or the abbot. All he cares about is the administration of this monastery. But out of that care for administration and its perpetuity, perhaps it is born out of a deep love to ensure the furtherance of the gospel of Jesus Christ. Maybe the abbot is the Messiah. Or Elrod. Surely it couldn't be Brother Elrod. He is the most crotchety fellow that we know. He always thinks that he's right. Come to think of it, he usually is right. But what if it's me? What if I could be the Messiah? Surely it couldn't be me. I'm full of sin and doubt. So as the brothers pondered who amongst them might be the Messiah, the attitude of depression and sadness shifted over the next few weeks. And instead of rolling their eyes at one another or fighting amidst one another, they began treating one another as if the other might be Jesus in their midst. Rolling of eyes turned into smiles. Bickering over chores began to be one-upmanships over how I can best serve the brother. And the attitude of that monastery changed, and folks would come in and out to visit this sacred space. And people began to pick up on the emotional, positive energy that was found in and amongst these brothers who believed that the Messiah was in their midst. And in this attitude of love, do you know what happened? A few younger brothers decided that they wanted to become part of a place where people truly loved one another and cared for one another. And today that monastery stands as a noble act of what God's people can do when we believe that God is in our midst. Over the past few weeks, we've been talking about joy and what can happen to us when we live as people who trust in the promise that God has given us, and we begin to experience joy. I'm going to ask Charlotte to advance my slide. Go advance 2 slides, if you would, please. There we go. And we've been talking about this formula that Miroslav Volf of Harvard has spelled out as he tries to define what it is for us to experience joy in our lives. And he says there are 4 necessities required for us to experience this emotional response called joy. The first is there must be an external object or experience that we're able to stand in relationship with. The second is this. We must think that object or experience is good in and of itself. The third thing is that object or experience is unowed. We did not do anything to deserve that good gift. And he says the fourth thing is this, easy. We have this emotional response that allows us to experience that emotion that we call and label joy. If we'll go back one, if we would. We're having some technical challenges, mostly due to me up here. Is the computer being goofy? Okay. While they're working on that, I believe that we all desire to experience joy, right? But we get so caught up in our own lives that I believe that we often fail to see those external objects or goods or experiences as good. Because sometimes we'll see things in our life and we'll think, oh, I don't like that. I think that is bad. I believe as Christians, God is calling us to observe reality around us, people, places, things, and see them for what they inherently are. Gifts from God. Something that is good and unowed to us. So as Christians, we need to start practicing how we are able to perceive reality around us. That's second thing. Objects or experiences, we are called to redefine our vision to see what is in and of itself inherently good. Now, I don't want you to play the video just yet, but behind me on the screen is a man called Sean Achor. He's a psychologist out of Harvard, and he talks a lot about happiness and joy. I think that those two definitions are difficult to really separate. So he's going to talk about happiness. I want you to hear him talk about joy. But he's done a lot of research with businesses, organizations, and people. And while he's using secular language, he's really using theological language. And he says that the problem with people or organizations achieving happiness is that we often think that we have to do something more to be more happy. And once we become more happy, we change the goalpost, and we have to become more happy. So if we tie that into our sermon from last week, where the sin is, I think I can achieve joy and goodness on my own, we know as Christians that we can't do that on our own, but all those are free gifts from God. So I'm going to let Sean Achor talk a little bit about how we need to change our perspective so that we may discover happiness or joy in our lives. We'll see if this works.
Not talk about the positive. The absence of disease is not health. Here's how we get to health. We need to reverse the formula for happiness and success. In the past 3 years, I've traveled to 45 different countries, working with schools and companies in the midst of an economic downturn. And what I found is that most companies and schools follow a formula for success, which is this: if I work harder, I'll be more successful. And if I'm more successful, then I'll be happier. That undergirds most of our parenting styles, our managing styles, the way that we motivate our behavior. And the problem is, it's scientifically broken and backwards for 2 reasons. First, every time your brain has a success, you just change the goalpost of what success looked like. You got good grades, now you have to get better grades. You got into a good school, now you have to get a better school. You got a good job, now you have to get a better job. You hit your sales target, we're going to change your sales target. And if happiness is on the opposite side of success, your brain never gets there. What we've done is we've pushed happiness over the cognitive horizon as a society. And that's because we think we have to be successful, then we'll be happier. But the real problem is our brains work in the opposite order. If you can raise somebody's level of positivity in the present, then their brain experiences what we now call a happiness advantage, which is your brain in positive performs significantly better than it does negative neutral stress. Your intelligence rises, your creativity rises, your energy levels rise. In fact, what we found is that every single business outcome improves. Your brain at positive is 31% more productive than your brain at negative, neutral, or stress. You're 37% better at sales. Doctors are 19% faster, more accurate at coming up with the correct diagnosis when positive instead of negative, neutral, or stress, which means we can reverse the formula. If we can find a way of becoming positive in the present, then our brains work even more successfully, as we're able to work harder, faster, and more intelligently. What we need to be able to do is reverse this formula so we can start to see what our brains are actually capable of. Because dopamine, which floods into your system when you're positive, has two functions. Not only does it make you happier, it turns on all the learning centers in your brain, allowing you to adapt to the world in a different way. We found that there are ways you can train your brain to be able to become more positive. In just a 2-minute span of time, done for 21 days in a row, we can actually rewire your brain, allowing your brain to actually work more optimistically and more successfully. We've done these things in research now in every single company that I've worked with, getting them to write down 3 new things that they're grateful for 21 days in a row, 3 new things each day, and at the end of it, their brain starts to retain a pattern of scanning the world not for the negative, but for the positive first. Journaling about one positive experience you've had over the past 24 hours allows your brain to relive it. Exercise teaches your brain your behavior matters. We find that meditation allows your brain to get over the cultural ADHD that we've been creating by trying to do multiple tasks at once, and allows our brains to focus on the task at hand. And finally, random acts of kindness or conscious acts of kindness. We get people, when they open up their inbox, to write one positive email praising or thanking somebody in their social support network. And by doing these activities, and by training your brain, just like we train our bodies, what we found is we can reverse the formula for happiness and success, and in doing so, not only create ripples of positivity, but create a real revolution. Thank you very much.
Redefining our measure of happiness, redefining our measure of joy. Joy is not something out there that we need to work harder for. Joy, happiness, is already contained here in amongst ourselves and in our body and in our community. Joy is already right here. And if we're able to rewire our brains or rewire our faith communities, I believe that we can have a revolution in our personal lives and in this community as well. So I've been trying to rewire my brain and to work on that. I'm going to see if Charlotte can go to the next slide. Dr. Acor used this slide about ways that we can concretely begin to rewire our brains. Some secular terms, and he cites some scholastic studies here. Gratitude, journaling, exercise, meditation, random acts of kindness. I love how the secular world is beginning to borrow from our deep spiritual heritage that we have as Christians, because these practices behind me are all wonderful and are all taken from our spiritual and sacred scriptures. 3 gratitudes. Give thanks without ceasing. Does anyone remember that from the New Testament? Journaling, a practice of prayer. Exercise. We remember when the scriptures tell us that our bodies are a temple, and we're called to take care of these sacred, animated pieces of flesh and carbon. Sacred. Take care of this. Meditation, prayer, and random acts of kindness. Talk about this in church, but I believe that God has called all of us to live intentional lives of kindness, dare say hospitality towards one another. Today we are going to focus on hospitality because you're going to be invited to a holy meal when I'm finished with this sermon up here. Dr. Acor talks about random acts of kindness. I really want to hone in on how we can live more hospitable lives so that we can know and experience joy in our presence. Hospitality may be somewhat difficult to define, but hospitality happens when we go out of our way to take care of the well-being of someone else, to make them feel at home and comfortable and loved and cared for. As Christians, hospitality is an imperative of our lives. The whole of Scripture is one of God's people being called to love for and care for the other in our midst. Indeed, in the New Testament, when Jesus is most explicit about who's in and who's out, Jesus wasn't talking about your doctrinal beliefs or what church you belong to. Jesus said, who's in? The one who fed the one who was hungry, gave water to those who were thirsty, who invited in the stranger, who visited the one in prison. Those are the ones who are in. Those people who are offering love and hospitality to the other. Our epistle text today from Hebrews reminds us that when we express hospitality to someone else, we may be offering hospitality to angels, even though we were unaware. And we come to our text from Luke, the road to Emmaus, Cleopas and the other unnamed disciple. And I always believe that that other unnamed disciple is Kevin Starcher, or insert your own name there. They're unnamed, but they're people, just like me and you, and they had these high hopes for what Jesus was going to do in their midst and for their people. Jesus was going to transform the status of the people of God and allow them to become the blessed people that they were always promised to be. But their Lord was crucified, and their hopes were dashed, and they were incredibly confused because there were some women who said, he's not in the tomb anymore. What's going on? What's happening? And they're downcast. And Jesus himself comes up to be with them, but they don't recognize that it's Jesus. Scripture said their faces were downcast, and I think sometimes our own faces have become downcast as well, because we worry about our own hopes and ambitions and desires for our own lives, and they're unmet. So the stranger comes up and says, what are you guys talking about? And they respond, I think rather amusingly, saying, are you the only one in Jerusalem who has not heard what has happened? And they recount their events of their great hope and their disappointment. And the stranger that they've invited in begins to teach them of what the scriptures had said all about this all along. And they have a terrific conversation on their way. The stranger, a.k.a. Jesus, says, I'm going to go forward. And Cleopas and Kevin, or insert your name, have the boldness to say, no, please stay with us. Night is coming. Have a meal. We want to take care of you. And in the midst of that meal, in the midst of that intentional hospitality to a stranger who in some ways was correcting their worldview, the stranger took the bread and broke it. And at that very moment, they realized it was Jesus himself there and in their midst. And what a blessing it was. For when they go to tell the other disciples, they say, were our hearts not burning when Jesus was with us? I'm going to see what our next slide is, Charlotte. If you want to believe in demons, be a preacher trying to get technology to work during a sermon. It's not working, that's okay. There are three things that Cleopas and Kevin Starcher did on the road to Emmaus that day. They welcomed the stranger. They were minding their own business, sharing their hurts and disappointments. And there's someone who comes up and says hello. And instead of saying, hello, how are you, and walking away, they invited the stranger to be part of their group. The second thing that they did was this. They shared. Not only did they share a meal, they were able to share themselves, their disappointments, their hopes. They didn't embody the 2017 stereotypical perspective that we always have to put on our best face and make sure that we look successful, make sure that we're doing all the right things. They were able to be themselves and to share their hurt and their heartbrokenness. The third thing that they did is that they went out of their way. Night was coming, they encountered a new friend. They wanted to make sure that this stranger was well taken care of. Come have a meal with us. Come stay with us. They could have easily said, yep, you need to go on your way, and we need to make our way back to Jerusalem to make sure the disciples know that those women, they're crazy. No. They said, come, be with us. And when they were having that meal together, they broke the bread, and they recognized that it was Christ who was with them all the time. Friends, I believe that we are called to be hospitable people, to welcome folks, to share of ourselves, to share of our belongings, and to make sure that we go out of our way to ensure that the other knows that they are cared for. Indeed, our theology says that when God created us, we are made in the image of God. So look around right now. All these faces you see have the fingerprint of the divine image on every single face. And how many of us are going to leave today, skip the coffee hour, and just come back next week for a really good sermon, right? No, church is best done when we are able to recognize Jesus Christ in the face of the other, in the face of the Republican, in the face of the Democrat, in the face of the Presbyterian, in the face of the atheist, in the face of the very rich person, and in the face especially of the very poor person. Every single human being, a precious gift to this world by God. And it matters infinitely how we treat all those faces and all those people. And when we reach out with love and hospitality to the other, we will learn. Sometimes our hearts will burn with joy and will be changed. I've gone on way too long. This church is hospitable. I want to challenge us to continue to be hospitable. Did you know that we host 2 other churches right here in this building? A church that worships in Ukrainian, the Church of the Living God. They'll be here at 1 or 1:30 this afternoon. If you want to come worship in a new way, come this afternoon. Saturday evenings, the 26-8 Church. I don't necessarily understand all that they do, but they have a lot of people right here in this building, and they worship the triune God. I understand it's a little Pentecostal. This church has gone out of our way to make sure that God's people feel welcome to worship here. And I want to challenge you with 2 more things, aside from just living a life that's more hospitable. The first is this: Sunday school in the summertime. We try to give our year-round teachers a break. What if you were brave enough to say, yeah, I'm going to make myself a little uncomfortable, and I'm going to welcome little kids that we say are made in the image of God, or really they act like little demons. But what if you might learn something and your heart be burned as you volunteer for Sunday school? I encourage you to think about that. The second is this. This fall, we're going to embark upon a church-wide program where we're going to ask everyone sitting here to be in a small group. Just for 4 times, once a month. It's not a lot, but we're going to ask everyone to be part of it. Because we believe that when we encounter one another in our homes and acts of hospitality, good things happen, right? So we're going to need, thank you. We will need some hosts. About 8 to 10 folks who say, yes, I want to open my home so that people may come together and learn more about God. Perhaps you are unable to host, but you have some financial resources. The curriculum is going to be about $50 per small group. Perhaps you would like to make a financial donation in the act of hospitality to make sure that that happens. Hospitality, those things are coming up. But in the midst of that monastery in Europe, God's presence was active. When those brothers started realizing that the Messiah might be one of you. Friends, I believe the Messiah is right here. And he invites all of you sinners in the greatest act of hospitality to come to this table so that you may know God's grace. Amen and amen. Will the ushers come forward as